covering an awful lot of territory today. I told you just recently, at the top of the hour, about 35,000 deaths in Mexico in the last 4 years. Meanwhile, to put that into perspective, 35,000, that's the number killed in Korea during the Korean War. And there have only been 8,800 civilians that have been killed in the last 4 years in Afghanistan. That's a war zone. The other is our border. Which one would you consider more dangerous? Our border is quickly becoming one of the most dangerous places on earth. Mexican drug cartels are now pushing up into the United States. They're visible in 230 American cities right now. No word from the DOJ on this one. They have no problem crossing our border. But as I just showed you, Americans who are trying to get passports legally to leave the country, they're facing a series of new questions that have Cass Sunstein's fingerprints all over them. It would make Jack Bauer cringe. I mean, why don't you just put nipple clamps on Americans over this? The biggest crisis our nation has ever faced, however, isn't being caused by enemies outside of our country. It is being done from an enemy within. And that enemy is called the Fed. While the president tries to blame speculators for the insane gas prices that we're hitting, I want to show you and continue to beat the drum on why this is really happening. There are new charts I want to show you today. I want to thank Kevin Metters, who helped put this together. He has an article that I read last night, charting the course to $7 gas. It's a great article. Find it at glenbeck.com and see the charts for yourself. I want to show you the first chart. First chart is from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, so you know it's credible. It's from them. This is the adjusted monetary base. This means how many dollars are we printing? This is 1980. How many dollars are we printing? Here's the dot-com bubble. See this? Can you pull in on one of the cameras? Get in as close as you can and see this little teeny, closer than that, a little teeny bubble right here. See it? It just goes up and then it comes right back down. All right? Then you have this slow slope up. Now, let me show you. That's the little blip. That's the panic, the dot-com. Print more money. Interest rates from 6.5 down to 1%. There it is. But steady increase. And now let me show you what happens with TARP. Here's TARP. I believe this is actually the stimulus here. This first spike is TARP, and then it is stimulus package. Got it? Significant spike. Now, let's see what's happened since. This is how much money we have printed. Little blip with Alan Greenspan and the dot-com bubble. Little blip here again for September 11th. Look at this. TARP, stimulus, QE2. This is incredible. Now I want to show you what's called the excess reserves chart. This chart shows how much is in the repository institutions, how much money is in the bank, all right? See if you can see that this is 1960. So all these years, it's pretty flat. How much, for 50 years, how much money the banks have in reserve. They have this in reserve, and then they lend it out to people. But you'll never guess what happens right around 2008, 2009. Oh, here's September 11th. They load up on reserves. Here's TARP. They're holding on to it. Now, the banks are holding on to much more money, which brings us to today. Look how much money they have in reserve. When they say the banks have the money, they're right. The banks do have the money, but there's more to that story. You don't want them to release this money. You think inflation is bad now. So what are the banks doing? They're investing in treasuries and they're collecting the interest on it. They're making money. No debate now in Congress on whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. That's what they're talking about. No debate on this. But on the debt ceiling, yes. And Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner says it's ridiculous to have a debate on this. We're on track to hit our debt ceiling of $14.3 trillion by May 16th. We have a record deficit of more than $1 trillion. So let's take a look at this next chart, which tracks the federal deficit. Here it is, surplus or deficit. Got it? 1945. This is the war. Look at the deficit we were in. Here you come. Here's the Reagan period. Then we get into Clinton. And now we get into 2000. All right, here we go. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, this is Clinton. We come back out into Clinton, and we have actually a surplus. Then what happens? We go into the Bush years, come down here. Remember when this was bad? Go ahead. Next. This is Obama. Yeah, that's kind of bad. Suddenly, $400 billion deficit doesn't look so bad now, does it? And this next chart is the one you need to watch. This is the velocity of money. I didn't understand this 2-3 years ago. I remember being up in bed actually pissed because I was reading about the money supply, and I'm like, I'm never going to use this in my whole life. What am I going to use this for? Velocity is the key. Do you remember when I showed you the first chart where it showed the spike on how much money? The velocity is pretty low right now because banks aren't lending. It means the speed of which money is leaving. So we know the Fed is printing money like it's a game of Monopoly. We know the banks are sitting on that Monopoly money. But you don't want that money to leave the bank and have any real velocity. Here's what happened in the 90s. We're putting our money back into our savings account for every dollar that is deposited. Of our money, it can be loaned out 9 to 10 more times by the banks. Look at the past decade. Here we are in decline. Now watch this. The homes start to come apart. Velocity is slow. Not a lot of money being lent out. You see a slight uptick in the past recent months. Good, right, wrong. When velocity spikes, it leads to more inflation. The more money that is available, the more the dollar is devalued. We must raise the interest rates to bring all of that money back from the first chart. Bring it back into the Fed. But that's going to hurt. I wonder if Ben Bernanke will be asked during his first press conference, not his. When I say his, I mean the Fed. The first press conference the Fed has had in 97 years. Something wicked this way comes. It's the destruction of your country. It is the biggest theft of freedom and money the world has ever seen. And it is being done by the Fed. And they're about to stand before you tomorrow in their first press conference in 97 years and say, we're just like you. No, they're not. They're not even governmental politicians. That is a private corporation. Why is no one on the left looking at this?
Are you a parent that's fed up with what your kids are being taught at school? You are not alone, and you can take action. Attention parents, join our live studio audience this Thursday at 5 p.m. Your child's future depends on it. Email GlennBeckTix@gmail.com to come to the show in New York City.